you have a particular interest in a neglected area of Latin poetry, namely the Latin poetry of late antiquity and the Middle Ages. So
Yeah.
after the kind of classical period of Latin verse. So can you just talk about that whole period and maybe why it's been neglected and why you're interested in it?
Sure. So I'm interested because I just think there's a lot of interesting stuff that I wasn't aware of that was written that I had to educate myself about it. And I think, to be blunt, um, the reason that it's not usually taught in university and stuff is a longstanding bigotry that comes out of um, British classicists in the late 19th century, early 20th century, who were virulently anti-Catholic. And as soon as Latin literature started becoming Christian, they decided it was worthless, it was degraded, and they're very harsh often in their characterizations of the work of this period. And it's really unfair. I mean, some of it is really very good. I mean, is it Virgil and Homer good? No, generally not. But better than a lot of the things that are taught canonically by people that come out of Eton and Oxford. And I've been particularly interested in the period where the poets were struggling to figure out how to take their pagan models and create Christian literature.
Hmm.
And some of those are abject failures. One point I went out to try to figure out what the earliest Christian poetry was. And there's some debate about that, but there's at least a good argument that it's someone named Commodianus. And it's some of the worst stuff you've ever seen. It's bad Latin, even accepting that Latin in that period had changed from classical Latin. It's bad in terms of content. I believe he was eventually labeled a heretic by the church. So there's some failures, and there's a lot of really bad didactic poetry, like Laurentius. But I'm fast. I've set aside for a little while. Sometimes I have a short attention span. I get excited about projects. I've got a lot of projects sort of on the shelf. But one of the ones that's close, you mentioned the Phoenix poems. One of the ones I find fascinating that almost nobody has read is Lactantius's Phoenix poem. And that really is, in my book, the first concerted, successful attempt by a Christian poet to take the classical models and make them Christian. And
What's funny is I believe I have read that, but it was rendered in prose.
Yes,
the
probably.
translation that I read. So I didn't even. I think I didn't even know it was a poem, to be honest.
Yes, yeah, and so, and he did a brilliant job. So he takes the Ovid Phoenix myth, which was probably taken from the Egyptians, and makes it with a fairly light touch, a Christian allegory. And of course, the Phoenix myth is perfect for persuading people that they should be taking the resurrection seriously. And it's a beautiful poem. What I've just had published, and I'm reading next week part of the Old English Phoenix, which I find kind of amusing because it's long. And in the beginning, you could tell that the anonymous author was kind of annoyed with Lactantius on a number of the choices that he made. But it was interesting. By the time it got to the end of, I think it's 676 lines, he's mellowed quite a bit. So his perspective on Lactantius kind of evolves over the length of the poem. But there's a lot of fascinating stuff there. A lot of it's very unpredictable. Aldhelm learned Latin at a time when there was almost nobody in Britain who knew Latin. There had not been, any Latin poets that we know of in Britain. So they had to import a tutor from Ireland. And Ireland was really wild in those days because, they had been cut off in so many ways from the the mainland, that they had developed their own sort of bizarre literature. They had very few original Latin texts. They had commentaries, and they had a lot of secondary sources, and they had grammars and that kind of thing. And so they kind of made up their own literature in lots of ways, and it was really very odd. James Joyce was really interested in that, and that is a very logical combination because they were experimental in some ways in sort of the same style that Joyce was. And that has kind of gotten, again, by the classicists, read out of the literature.
What's really striking to me is that Catholics don't even read this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, we read, of course, we read Dante, we read Chaucer, we read stuff as soon as it gets into the vernacular, even Anglo-Saxon stuff, we read, but not if it was, we don't read any, I never hear about, Latin Anglo-Saxon poets or, I just, I picked up a book of poems by Prudentius and that I saw in a used bookstore, early Christian poet. I haven't read it yet. I know a little bit about him, but I never hear anybody quoting him or talking about him. So, it's just interesting that these things haven't really even been recovered in the Catholic world, except for as a patristic historical footnote or something.
There's a lot of, there are a lot more people paying attention today than 25 years ago, but it's still a pretty small number of people. There are some really good young classic scholars who are paying serious attention. I mean, there's James Uden at Boston University and Victoria Mall at the University of London, and some marvelous people. And so I think there's hope, but it is just, for me, it's bizarre that the whole tradition linking the classical world and the medieval world was kind of read out of existence. And again, I think with very bad motivation.
Right.
And so I felt sort of a mission. So I've done a couple of these late antique translations with Aldhelm and Maximianus, and a significant number of the poems in the delayed Phoenix anthology are from that period as well. And I've done, other stray stuff. And there's a lot of really good, interesting work. There's also a ton of stuff that's just never been translated, which is, for a translator, I view that as an opportunity. And I can do that because I'm a non-academic. If I were an academic, there'd be all kinds of discouragement from doing that. I think a general sense, well, if no one's bothered translating it up until now, how could it be worth translating? It's sort of circular logic that way.
Right.
And I'm free of all those constraints. And so I just kind of can plow through and do what I want. And if it's not making my life better, I can drop it and I can do something else. And I think, it's nice having that freedom, which I think a lot of people doing translation don't have.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess if you're, doing the hymns in the Divine Office, the Liturgy of the Hours, you get some of this stuff, hymns by St. Ambrose and things like that. But, that's about all that most, Catholics would be exposed to